Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to Elite EDM Stars and the third part of Introduction to Producing a House Track with Unison MIDI Files. So in part 3, what we're going to do is quickly recap session 2. So session 1 was the arrangement. Session 2 was fine-tuning and sound replacement, adding some effects and stuff. So we're going to recap on this and what I've done since then. I'm just going to quickly just promote this across the channels. Can you just bear with me? Okay, so let's get to the files and let's remove that. Okay, so today's session is about mixing, and so welcome to the Introduction to Producing a House Track with Unison MIDI part 3. As I say, in session 1 we did the arrangement, session 2 some fine tuning of the sounds, adding effects, developing transitions, trying to add some new layers. Didn't get round to adding a melody or developing the outro. Did some basic mixing and compression and EQ. So in session 3, I'm just going to turn this feedback off there. So in session 3, what we decided to do, we're going to do now is just a quick recap. What I've done is I've actually developed the track, and I'm going to show you some developments I've made to the track. And then we're going to prepare your track for mixing, volume and dynamics, dynamic range, so final mix down or mix as you go, which tools are best for mixing, suitable layers that complement, using automation, EQ, compression, limiting, adding some depth to the mix using the reverbs and other effects, subgroup filter effects, and controlling digital noise and in the mix. So what I've had to do, I'm just going to come and show you this. So in the track I developed this stage, and here's my notes. So stage 3 of Unison MIDI Files from SEP says that sort of, you go into the mixing EQ stage, tighten your drums with compression, saturate the bass, anything you need to do, so then you're adding final touches. So what I've done, I've developed the track to save some time here. I've introduced the 8th bar forward by the introduction synth here, 8 bars forward. So, and I've created double kick drums, and I've sorted out my kick drums with fades and also on the loops and the effects. I've inserted a 5-bar section and copied the bar from section 25 here to section 41, so the repeat of that kind of a drop there. Then I've added 3 different melodies to try out, and I ended up with going with one melody that leads into another melody that kind of does work. It's preferable choice, but then I've added a subgroup with a filter to control the kick and the loops, and then I've added a noise gate. And the reason I added a noise gate, because lots of digital noise was coming up in the mix. So on my master out, I've actually put just a gate here so that it just cuts off a lot of noise. So with just coming on to this, so I'm sort of moving backwards here from the noise gate, because this is important in case that some of the delays and the effects do cut out. You'll have to adjust the threshold on your noise gate, and this is purely to stop digital noise from a microphone, from other elements that are adding to it. Like the microphone inputs adds noise, some of the instruments, digital VST instruments, add noise to the mix. So just adding that noise gate as you're mixing will make a massive difference. Now I have got a mastering chain on here, and I'm going to turn off the mastering chain so that we're getting just the mix as it is on its own, and then I will add the master in and tweak later. I've just basically this OTT adds a lot of noise into the mix as well, hence I needed a noise gate there again. It's a multi-band dynamic compressor. had some sparkle to high-end frequencies and mid frequencies. So also a glue compressor and a make it loud mastering compressor, which I'll reset myself, and I usually tweak back until I get a nice little signal between 0 and 5 decibels on both of these. So we'll come back to that later. And I'm going to introduce you to what I've done in the mix. I haven't completed the whole mix, it's just until this section here, 2 minutes and 20. But the aim of this session is to just try and walk you through what I would do to start mixing the track. Usually, as I say, I tend to mix as I go. So what I do for preparing the track is I start to drop in more markers for a start. I start to colour everything, make sure everything's you know, visible in the mix. You can see double kicks there, change colours so I can get to them quickly and easily. Put the kick drum on a white so you can see those changes if you're using audio especially. Other things I had to do was I had to come in and make sure that the fades, let me just turn the automation off, so I had to click on each kick drum and make sure that the fades weren't on, because if you come into Ableton and go into record and warp, when you import your files you have the options to turn on the where's it gone now, not the auto loop samples, but yeah, that also, but also the default warp mode. It comes in as beats and create fades here, create fades on clip edges, so I want that off. I had it on the previous sessions and I forgot to actually turn it off. I usually don't want fades on stuff unless, you know, it's absolutely necessary. If I've been recording audio, then I'll actually create the fade myself. So also, just while we're here, loops, while you're dragging loops in, if you're working on stem files, you want to keep them unwarped and one shots. You only want them on auto really if you're dragging lots of drum loops and you're doing a live session very quickly. So I tend to change this over depending on the type of session that I'm working on. So moving on quickly from this, I had to make a lot of corrections in these kicks. When you end a kick, it usually has a fade on. There will be a crossfade when it meets another section. So I had to check all these kicks were okay. And you can see there I've got a few double kicks. I need to change the colours. So we're just going to select those, change that colour there, and grab those three. Come on. There we go. So we'll put those in red. And making sure that the fades are working there, just literally I like to open up the file there, and you can just make sure that the fade is across there. But if you can see that the fade will start to come across there, you can actually drag it across, but we don't want that. So it automatically crossfades there, but just make sure that the next kicks are, you know, you can see that drags across, and you don't want that also. So we're just making sure that kicks lined up. You see that's right bang on the beat then, and making sure that the next fade section is actually, it is what it is. There you go. Because what I noticed on the kick drums is that the kicks were sounding a little bit flat and they weren't catching the initial attack of the kick drum. So I just had to make sure all of that was working. Now if I'd been working in MIDI, that wouldn't have been much of so much of a problem, but I happen to be working a kick drum loop in this particular track. Also again, I had to make sure on the kick drums, sorry, on the loops, that the same was happening, because I noticed some of the loops were cutting off like that and it was missing the initial tacks of the percussion loops. It's okay, I think I noticed on the snaps it's fine here to have a little bit of a fade. You'll notice it naturally comes in there, It's ever so noticeable, and you wonder why that your kick drums sound flat, and that is the reason why, if you actually dragging audio samples in all of the time. So I'm going to play the track through and let you hear what the changes I've made. Just quickly, I'm going to just discuss a little bit about volume and dynamic range. Obviously the volume is the overall volume of all of the sounds sitting in the mix. So some of those volumes in dance tracks, they need to be quite loud, and not everything can be loud in the track. It needs to have some kind of form of dynamic range. So you can control that dynamic range by panning certain instruments to the left, to the right, to the center of the mix, moving them in stereo, or you can use natural panning techniques. You can also use compression, EQ to bring them around. You can automate your EQs, automate your compressors over time, automate distortions to come in and out of real time. But the main thing is that some sounds need to be held back in the mix, and that's why when I start a track I always mix as I go. And if we just come into the mixing now, I'm just going to make sure that everything is set to 0, because I was having problems with a MIDI spike, and I'm hoping it's not going to work and start distorting the mix. And my apologies if it does start suddenly bumping up loud. There is a MIDI spike going on somewhere which I'm yet to locate. Okay, so I'm going to take this away so a little bit more real estate. And as I say, when I start mixing, I like to have the mixers of full by dragging them up, making sure you can see your volume levels. You see my microphone there. As I get loaded closer to the mic, it should be a lot more louder. And don't have anything clip view at the moment because I'm not working in clip view, but I just wanted to show you the sort of dynamic range as I start to set. -6 for the kick drums, and I've actually got my master out on -4 at the moment, but I'm going to put that up. Actually, if I put that up at the moment without the master on, it will start to peak up. So it's going to be interesting to see how the levels are with the master out, and that's what I want to see at first without putting my actual mastering chain back on and controlling those levels. So I'm going to have to drag this gate out a sec and put that gate on. That's it. So I want that gate separate to the mastering chain. So I'll play with and without my mastering chain as I go out through the starting point of this track, and I'll just play the new changes through from the start. Okay guys, so right. So what I did, obviously, is added these two melodies or three melodies in here. This melody wasn't working, so obviously I haven't gone through that, won't go into that. I just literally quickly found three melodies that might suit in the right key, in A minor, and I ended up sort of liking that one, and then also trying this one in a slightly different sound. And I'm just using the basic Ableton synths here, so I'm just making sure that everything's okay here. Yeah, okay. And it was just something to get me started, just so I can move the track forward and give some mixing techniques and stuff and what have you. So there's nothing on these at all. It's just the Ableton synthesizers, and they're just pretty much raw. So let's say final mix down and mixing as you go, and volume and dynamic range. So the dynamic range is obviously the difference between the quietest sounds and the loudest sounds. So that's very important in this mix. Obviously I've got two lead sounds here fighting for each other in a very similar, very kind of pattern, same key. So the aim for me would to be sort of separate these, which I've already done. I've panned them slightly in the mix, left to right. I may add some mid-side band EQ onto each one of them to separate them even more. On the effects, I've added a little bit of overdrive to the effects on a little bit warmer compressor, glue side chain there, and we've got the has effect. That's keeping all the effects under control, and EQ as well. Maybe add a little bit of sparkle in there, but rolling off just to make sure that we take away those nasty high frequencies. Okay, so that's what we'll do that slightly. The most important part is obviously getting the kick drum to punch through and getting the rhythm and the bass all working together. So again, what I do, as I say, normally I do this as I go, but what I also do, guys, is I like to go back into the mix and just check these elements again. I like to turn up the system loud in the studio, just listen to the kick and the bass, slowly introduce the elements back in again. You can either set up faders on your mixer like I've got here. I can control these faders if I wanted to. They're automatically panned to the first set of channels here with this mixer and this little pad controller, Akai API. Is it API? Yeah. And I can control these sections here if I wanted to in any of these volumes. Bear in mind some are automated, so it will override your automation. We'll come back to the synths in a sec. So we're going to start with a kick drum. And this is where I have to remember to keep on my microphone on. And we're going to start with the bass, and we're going to bring the bass in here. Okay guys, yeah. So that was me moving into the mix there, get some kick and bass balance, and then I shall move now onto the chords and try and get a little bit more separation in some of these synthesizers by panning them slightly. Just going to listen to the chords through, and we're going to work on trying to get a nice balance in this mix. And so the tools I'd recommend for best for mixing, obviously I'm just a massive fan of using compressors and EQs all of the time, using parallel compression as best as I can, try and let the natural elements come through in the mix and just control them with dynamics in your mixer. Really just, you know, pull them back, make sure everything just sits nicely together, gels together cohesively. I'm going to work on obviously putting the drums into the mix in a second as well. So we'll go back to the kick and the drums, and we'll come back into the chords in a second. So what you can notice there, guys, is that my drums have already pretty much got full parallel compression or a lot of compression and going on an EQ. I haven't really tweaked much with the EQ, just rolled off the tops there, brought most of the frequencies out really with the compressors. The drums, or should I say the percussion part of the drums, is part of pretty much mixing as I go, and that's what I tend to do. That with every track I try and get the drums and the kick drum sounding right straight away, and then obviously the bass line next. Right. So guys, I keep forgetting to put my microphone back up. That was an extra layer I created there on just on silence, just by pretty much adding in a control over the LFO rate and the gain here. So you just watch this. And that pretty much just controlled the actual chord and then activated the LFO, and a little bit more intensity on the LFO rate that I just got set here, which is then applied to the cutoff frequency, which is set over here, and also making sure that your filters type is turned on and your filter is at least coming through at least filter A or A in part B, depending on the sound. You can see there's no sound banks turned on for that particular sound, it's just coming through part 1, oscillator 1, or should I say part A, and just going up, and it comes down naturally and just activates that sort of wobbly effect on a rate of 1/16. And that was just like an extra, as I say, an extra chord effect I dropped in there. So I'm just going to put a little bit of width onto this, and while I'm in there as well, I'm just going to put a little bit of punch and parallel. In fact, no, I want just a gentle 2-bus compressor on there. I want to keep that centralized, and I may put a phase shifter on it later on, but for this I'm just keeping it short. I mean, what I do is I tend to experiment with things. I try things like noise reduction, adding a little bit of noise, bit crushing on the sound towards the end of the effect, putting delay on the end of that as well, and making it carry out. There's all kinds of things you can try out, and just you really what you got to do is try and experiment that suits the style of the track. I try and keep it simple by using just a reverb and a delay in the track, and I don't try and wash everything out in reverb and delay. I just use good quality sounding and samples, and try and balance those as best as I can in the mix, really. So the rawer the better. What am I going for on this? Oh, that's some nice new tools. Drums bus, I didn't realise that. That's a nice new addition to Ableton. Drums bus, wonderful. Must come and check those drums out then again in a second. We've got some nice new drum buses to play with. As I say, guys, I'm used to Ableton Live 9, so I'm still getting used to Live 10 and some of the additional features in there. So this is as much as a learning curve for you, for me, as it is for you. But I am just sort of trying to get into there about mixing, adding suitable layers, using automation. So I did find where the fades come available now, and obviously you have to click off there on the automation lanes and make sure that you can access your fades, otherwise you can't see those fades. All you can see is your automation lanes, and again that's just a little bit of a feature change I hadn't noticed again in Ableton Live 10. So I'm going to try and keep this pretty short today. Not going to go madly into it, but obviously just EQ and compression. I tend to sort of just try something out, reset it, see what it does in the mix. If it adds the crunch I'm looking for, or the dynamic range that I'm looking for, then brilliant, it brings it up. If it doesn't and it messes it up, then I obviously just try something else. But it is all about experimenting with your sort of your DAW, and there is so much stuff in here, and you've just got to try it and experiment with it. I mean, there's so many reverbs to mess around with, and that's why you can really get lost with too many reverbs. I try and keep it to say 1 or 2, 3 delays maximum, if I'm looking for like a filter delay effect, and then again I might just bounce that down to audio afterwards. It depends what you're trying to create, really, and the only way to find out what things do is to mess around and experiment with them. And that's what I'd spent most of my time doing over the years, is literally just experimenting with sound, seeing what it does, how it affects the sound, coming away from that, processing it, and then learning to actually piece tracks together with transitions. I find, as I say, my most best friend is the bass clef washout, easy washout plugin, because it does all of the effects that I've tried to create myself, like that DJ washout effect where it strips out the kick drum, the low frequencies, adds a little bit of delay and reverb into the mix, and if it's used in the correct way, it is very, very useful. As you can see, all of these play out, so the auto filter comes into play, the dry wet signal into the reverb comes into play. As you can hear my voice probably now. So yeah, just going to try and answer a few more questions so we can get through to this, and what I'd like you to do is, if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel. Let's just turn that off. So we've discussed about digital noise, adding depth into the mix using reverbs. As I say, I tend to use my 2 channels. I like to just use the delay and the reverb on those. Standard delay, send with the reverb turned up full, high cut, standard cuts in. Sometimes I like to just shift it around a little bit, have a tweak. I mess around with a pre-delay depending on the type of effect I'm looking for. If I want a little bit more slight delay of the reverb, I'll move that up to maybe about 11 milliseconds. But usually I go with a standard Ableton reverb to start out with, and then if I want something a bit more extreme, I also sometimes start adding compressors onto the reverb as well, just to bring the reverbs out a little bit more, so when they're playing in the mix they do come out a little bit better. And I sometimes filter, and I put a high pass filter onto my reverb and also onto my delays as well, and I just like to filter them out. So put the same again on here, a compressor, basic compressor, just to bring them up, purely because I haven't got a digital outboard gear, which I used to have lots of digital outboard gear. All I've got left at the moment is only the sampler at the moment, and a few live bits that I've fetched down. Recently I'm starting to set up some of the old live gear that I used to use, the live hardware, going sort of the Roland MCO 303, Yamaha DX27, Roland Juno D. I'm trying to sample some of the sounds off there and bring them back in, and an old Akai sound box down here as well. So that'll be interesting when I start throwing all that together again. I got the Korg as well last night. I got my Korg back, so my Korg MSR 2000R. So I'm trying to sample some live sounds off it and crack down sound banks up again. But yeah, that's what I sort of tend to do with that, and maybe, to say, maybe put a filter on the delay sometimes if I want to control that, a high pass filter. If you can activate the filter here as well. You can see there's a filter on that one there. So it just depends what you're trying to do and what you're trying to create. There's so many different ways of inserting effects. You can actually get into a mess, but as I say, as a rule, I try and keep reverbs and delays onto send effects for my mixing. Sort of old school, sending effects down to sort of subgroups. Now, creating this subgroup here, what I did, simply created an audio channel and inserted an audio channel, and then I turned them on. So set to in, and on there it's just a simple filter, so that the kick is then routed here. You can see the kick is routed to subgroup filter. I've also got the drums routed to subgroup filter. So that creates that sort of like you're in a nightclub toilet sort of sound. But I like to do that sometimes in a mix, and then also I can put a little bit of compression back on that and control the dynamics. Maybe a little bit of glue, punch and parallel. So as I say, controlling my digital noise in my mix. That again came down to literally just dropping the noise gate on there, adjusting the threshold low enough so that when I talk there's a signal and it should just cut me off without doing that. It's cut me off. So you're just looking for a little bit of noise reduction. You will notice it sometimes, especially when you're plugging in lots of microphones and stuff as well, and you're doing sort of stuff like this if you do anything live. So guys, that pretty much wraps up the session, and what I will be doing is working on other sections, and then I maybe do a part 4 to this once I've completed a lot more sections. The lead melody does need some work. Obviously the sounds are literally all I've ever done is just drop 2 basic transcending lead sounds, and same again there on that. I haven't really done much work on that, so I may do a part 4 to this once I've worked on it a little bit more as a follow-on and when I've ended the track. But for now it's pretty much, it would be just me working on this front section, adding some more tom effects, so plotting along any rhythmical changes I want to make in the track. So what I would do is, if for example I'd add locators and I'd just kicks, double, can't spell today. So it just sort of helps you map out your final mixing stage really. And again, it should be done as you're building the arrangement as well, but you don't always know what you want to go where. Those elements, these little fine-tuning elements in a track, I mean, I've got to add crashes here. I haven't had any crashes to this section to brighten this up. I've got to add a lot more stuff there, and I would add crash breaks and stuff, and maybe filtering going on. Might be more percussion I add in. I've literally just so much to do. Coming to the drums, we're just going to try a different sort of parallel compression on these drums. So just have a couple of minutes on this.